It's taken a while for me to get around to this second introspective. My purpose in these is to explain my understanding at this time, in part to document it, and also to provide an understanding of how my thinking may change over time. The pandemic has certainly changed things, and while I have not been working, I have been busy. I did not expect that I would be spending time in field research this year, at least not much, but I did spend some time out in the woods, listening and looking for signs of Sasquatch. I was also busy with vacation properties that we own, and also setting up a workshop for my wife to do woodworking. One of the things I've observed is that there is very little scientific thinking in the world, and this really actually is a problem. Nearly everyone seems to wonder why science does not recognize the clear evidence for Sasquatch, and this is, frankly, largely evidence of that lack of scientific thinking. As an engineer and a scientist, who also used to do various demonstrations at a science museum in Seattle, I want to address what science brings to the table for fringe topics such as Sasquatch and paranormal research. As background for this, I want you to be familiar with the baloney detection kit presented by Carl Sagan in his book, The Demon-Haunted World: Science as a Candle in the Dark. There are more modern variations of this, like that of Michael Shermer, which in some ways is just a little more flexible for changing times. It's more future-proofed. When these checklists are followed with intellectual honesty, you will be far less likely to fall into the traps of well-designed misinformation. Here, I am going to explore the ideas of science and belief, and of truth and facts. The subject is rife with conflicting truths, very few facts, and, again, a significant lack of scientific thoroughness, alongside a great deal of consternation for science not taking these subjects seriously. I'm going to confront, to some extent, the subject of evil and the nature of humanity, because so many people seem to believe the origins of Sasquatch are pseudo-biblical evil. We tend to fear what we don't understand, but the fact that someone is afraid of a thing does not make the thing they're afraid of evil. In fact, I pose that most evil in the world stems from the human will to remain ignorant. After all, learning requires some effort. In fact, it also requires an acknowledged gap in understanding. Besides, there's more money in exploiting the fear of people, isn't there? Social media has contributed efficiently and horribly to the emphasis of truth and to the dilution of fact. See my previous video on brain contortions to understand how the brain will avoid looking bad. Social media also allows us to create echo chambers where our thinking can be amplified by those we like and follow, and insulate us from conflicting ideas. It's the democratization of truth and is having horrible impacts on our society, dragging us back towards the age of pitchforks and torches. The so-called Bigfoot community is a diverse and fractious village of feuding interests, which range from "I'm going to be famous for discovering and owning Bigfoot" to "they are spiritual beings here to help us find enlightenment," and everything in between. There are the flesh and blood believers and the shape-shifting energy being believers, and everything in between. Most people will cherry-pick what they want to believe from the stories they hear and what little evidence there is. I hear people express that we can prove Bigfoot exists in a court of law. What's the problem with science? Well, a court of law may have a higher standard of truth than social media, but in comparison to science, the courts have a very low standard of evidence. Science can actually be pretty brutal with new ideas. Those that survive introduction are welcomed, at least tentatively, to show how they stand up to being tested. It's a vital element to science that a new idea can be demonstrated and, most importantly, can be disproved. If an experiment can be devised to measure the idea, and one result would disprove the idea, then it is tested. If it stands up to repeated testing without being disproved, it becomes accepted as a theory in science. In common use of the word theory, we mean speculation or conjecture. In science, we use the words speculation and conjecture. For a theory is among the highest places of honor in science. Some theories are so profoundly solid, we may occasionally call them laws, such as Newton's laws. I refer here to Newton's laws because it was not long before we discovered they had a problem that could not be solved. They could not predict the orbit of Mercury over time. They were always off by the same amount, but the math simply couldn't account for the error. If you examine how Einstein explains the difference, and if you apply more common everyday parameters, the differences from general relativity to Newton's laws are so small that we cannot easily measure them for everyday application. We can effectively ignore them. Yet these equations are also wrong. We already know this. We've known it for quite some time. They explain things on a very large scale across the universe, but they do not explain things on a very small scale of quantum physics. When we do make that breakthrough, we will find, when applied on a very large scale, whatever those differences are will become vanishingly small, and they will appear like Einstein's general relativity. And when applied in everyday applications, they will end up looking just like Newton's laws. As we learn more, we can better model the world around us. But we can also understand how our previous understanding was often an acceptable approximation. We may even continue to use that approximation because of its relative simplicity, provided the difference is vanishingly small. Science provides a framework where new ideas must be proven to be correct. More than that, however, any idea must be demonstrated in such a way that, if it is wrong, it can be disproved. If a new idea cannot be disproved, then it is not complete enough for consideration by science. That does not mean people of science must entirely ignore the idea. It just means that they cannot accept it at face value until they understand it to the extent that they can not only demonstrate it to be true, but in such a way that if it is not true, then the demonstration would fail. They will question the new idea relentlessly, and if it fails to stand up to questioning, they will move on. Honor those who seek the truth. Beware those who have already found it. We all know that what we believe is true. That's how wars get started. After all, who would believe in a thing which they knew was not true? Truth is a philosophical construct. It is flexible, it's relative, it's transient. It's not always rooted in fact. In a master class by Neil deGrasse Tyson, he reduces the basic idea to three kinds of truth. There is political truth, that is declared to be true by an authority, and accepted to be true by those who subscribe to that authority as being correct and honest. There is personal truth, the personal belief, often instilled by family or friends, and is accepted to be true as a matter of faith or of personal comfort. And there's objective truth. This kind of truth does not depend on belief or acceptance. It is based on fact. It is something that can be demonstrated experimentally. Some people would add religious truth, but in my mind, religious truth is the same as political truth within this context. A common form of political truth is that Sasquatch cannot exist. For many people, this is the truth, and some are passionately dedicated to this assertion for various reasons. There is a political truth that the current health crisis is a hoax, and that truth is causing untold harm in our society. An example of personal truth may be found in the question, why is the sky blue? A simple answer to that question may be, because God made it that way. This is not a bad answer, and it may be the only answer someone needs for their entire life, with the possible exception of a high school physics test. However, that answer cannot be true for someone who is an atheist. Since an atheist does not believe in any deities, God certainly cannot be responsible for the sky being blue. Someone who believes in a pantheon of gods cannot accept that answer either. For them, there is a particular God who made the sky blue, and probably an elaborate story supporting that truth. Someone who believes in a different pantheon of gods will not likely share that same explanation, however. For them, it was a different God with a different story. For 3 of these 4 people, there is a different and conflicting personal truth. Is there a truth which all of these people can accept? Is there a kind of truth that is independent of belief? I will leave the explanation to the single word, scattering. You can look it up if you choose. I used to demonstrate this principle with just 4 items. An empty aquarium, preferably in the 25-gallon size. Clear water to fill the aquarium. About a cup of milk to mix into that water, and an incandescent light bulb to place near the end of the aquarium. Incandescent is kind of important. You need a full spectrum, and a thermal emission spectrum from a hot filament is the best way to do this. You probably saw this demonstration in high school, maybe junior high. Viewed from the far end of the aquarium, the lamp appears reddish, like the sun at sunrise or sunset. Viewed from the side, the water seems bluish, because the shorter wavelengths of light are being scattered by the particles introduced by adding the milk to the water. In the sky overhead, you see the sun as essentially white. You will get longer wavelengths directly, and the shorter wavelengths will be scattered from every surrounding direction. The sky itself appears blue because of scattering. At sunset, you will see the sun is reddish, since less of the scattered short wavelengths reach you from that direction in the sky. This answer is true regardless of what you want to think, because it is objectively true. However, if you're still dedicated to a deity being involved, this merely demonstrates how the sky was made blue. Your belief in the deity is unaffected by the knowledge of how the physics works. Many people do not rely on a deity where rationalism has provided an explanation of things. Their faith is that rationalism will eventually explain everything else as we learn more. However, I do understand and appreciate those who rely on the presence of a deity to explain things, and that they rationally accept the explanation as a revelation of how that deity accomplished the phenomenon. Some may say this is merely using a crutch to explain what we cannot yet explain. And in truth, it may be just that. However, to my mind, there is no harm in adopting this thinking for the comfort of not having to say, I don't know, which for some is a terrifying thing to say. Just realize that as time moves forward, we will learn to understand things that may seem mysterious today. Perhaps that is a failing, a vanity, to evade admission of ignorance. Science and rationalism have failed to find evidence of God in their experiments to show how things work. Yet, some perceive a larger pattern to how things work, and they find comfort in seeing those patterns as evidence for a God that science and rationalism may never learn to measure. Many of those with a formal education in religion will say something to the effect of, Science is unlikely to find evidence for the existence of God. The world we live in is made in this way so that we who live within it may look upon what is there and decide for themselves. Faith is the very definition of this decision because there is no clear evidence to support it from the sense of science and rationalism. Many people believe Sasquatch does not exist, and many admit they don't know. The rest believe Sasquatch does exist, or claim they know so, and for them this is truth. But there are many variations of this truth. Some believe it is a primate, like you and I are primates. Simple, mundane animals. For them this is the truth, and some are quite passionate about this belief. In particular, many are passionate about the point that Sasquatch is lesser than we humans, probably a great ape. This is the truth for these people. Some believe they are extraterrestrials, transplanted here long ago for reasons we do not understand. This is the truth for those people. Some believe they are enlightened spiritual beings, regardless of their origins, and this is their truth. Some believe they are descended from the offspring of fallen angels, the Nephilim, as interpreted by examination of the Old Testament of the Bible. And this is the truth for these people, and it is also suggestive that they are essentially evil in nature. There are many others, but many of these truths are not compatible with each other. The passion behind various beliefs accounts for the fractiousness of the so-called Sasquatch community. Rationally, there is evidence that we do not know enough. It is logically clear that all of these truths cannot be so, but we have so little evidence to make an informed set of conclusions either. What science brings to the table here is an approach to keeping observations about phenomenon and, without dismissing them, organizing them into properties that describe a phenomenon. After this video, check out the links to learn about the invaluable contribution by Carl Sagan called the Baloney Detection Kit. While there are several variations of it now, they all have the same core ideal: to help you determine if you are being misled by ideas that have no basis in fact. There are some who say you should never question the thoughts of honest, hard-working people, that age and experience make people authorities and experts who know what they're talking about and should be believed. I think there is value to these concepts, but, to be honest, I always want to know more. Also, to be honest, I have observed that not all opinions are of equal value. I also wonder, especially in these topics, if the given authority has some perceived gain in their perspective. So I will always ask questions. I will investigate on my own all of these thoughts and ideas. I often find them to be questionable in some way, and sometimes I find them to be completely misinformed. I often find people accepting of opinion of some authorities without question, often rejecting the opinion of other experts in an act of cherry-picking ideas that support their own personal truths. Now more than ever, in the world of social media, the truth is an infinite buffet of shiny ideas that tickle the selective palate. Yet, as some tribes in Africa have shown us, you actually can make manure shine. Alternatively, people form their own opinions based on personal experience. More broadly experienced people may have a different perception of the same experience. If the one describing an experience is open to respectful questions for greater understanding, you should ask them. But if those questions result in defensive behavior, then stop. Their truths are not open for consideration. If people choose not to check their own truths against fact, well, that's their right. However, before we adopt their beliefs, we are responsible to check them against fact ourselves. This is not the same as challenging them on their beliefs. We are not seeking to change their thinking. It is our own challenge to be intellectually honest with ourselves, to be the best we can be. Anything less is a disservice to our own integrity. I also recommend that you watch the Richard Feynman interview where he discusses the dangers of the question why, and also touches on the equally dangerous question of how. When understanding an encounter with anything unusual, pay most attention to the description of the experience and less attention to the explanations. Most of the important details are from the well-known questions who, what, where, when. And in those we find descriptive ideas. Now it's acceptable to draw from other familiar ideas to illustrate that experience. In general, though, the other well-known questions, why and how, are more explanatory in nature. And to be intellectually honest in their use, you must understand that you're trying to express something that requires an understanding. As Feynman notes, you're forced to presume an understanding of what's being said, which is perilous. Usually, in understanding why and how, you end up making judgments about things that you may not truly understand, while at the same time leading others into thinking that you may not expect or even intend. What science brings to the table here is guidelines to record observations and their context in the thinking of the cultural background of the observer, so that anyone can evaluate the information in a less biased form. When someone makes a claim they know to be untrue, well, that's clearly a lie. How about when someone makes a claim they do not know to be true, but neglects to check their own facts? Do we accept their belief to be represented with truth? How can we know? Are we not responsible to check their facts for ourselves before we step upon that bandwagon? What happens when the facts refute this accepted truth? Does it become a lie? Personally, I consider them to be misinformed, and they're sharing what they genuinely believe. This is the very definition of misinformation. Anyone who chose to investigate the claim should know they are choosing to believe a claim not known to be true. They should not be surprised to find out later that it is not actually true. What if the fact falsifying the idea is just a few words in a Google search away? What if the fact is solid and verifiable and accepted to be true by experts? I would say that my cousins Ibble and Gull do get around. What if the presenter never bothered to question their own idea? Well, this is poor reasoning and it's bad science. It's argument from authority, and that's a form of logical fallacy. What of those who accept the claim without question? That is willful ignorance. Let's suppose this claim was used to make people afraid about something. Let's say people who don't look the same as we do. What about Sasquatch? When people accept a claim without question, we take another step back to the days of pitchforks and torches. Science begins with observation, and we record observations with questions designed to garner details. We even seek to observe the explanations given for context, but we do not necessarily accept them as being complete or correct. Later, we work to find patterns and associations that logically guide us to the understandings that we can test. This method helps us to recognize when we may be misinformed by a lack of information and by conclusions that are biased in various ways. If we do not understand something, we may naturally be afraid of it. If we choose not to understand it out of a will to remain ignorant or of laziness to seek knowledge, we deliberately choose fear over enlightened reason. This is where the seed of evil is planted. We tend to hate what we fear. We have a word for it: demonization. We literally make the thing we're afraid of the embodiment of evil, because we don't want to learn the truth about it, and we don't want others to bother us with the truth about it. So we do our best to prevent them from even wanting to learn about it, and then try to change our minds on the subject. No, we just don't want to go there. We tend to kill what we hate. How many wars are not begun with willful ignorance? Now, it could be true that a thing is genuinely dangerous. It may be deliberately brutal or violent. It may actually be evil. But if we choose violence out of fear instead of logic and reason, are we not at least as evil as that? Are we not deliberately brutal and violent, then, because of fear and ignorance? In this, science brings us discipline in thinking to help us avoid the consequences of action out of passion rather than reason. It seeks to check our emotions and ensure that our choices come from an understanding through logic and reason. Let's go back to the term demonization. Wouldn't a clever demon, an actual demon, seek to trick humans into acting out of fear instead of reason? Why do the evil itself when it could further corrupt the likes of us, tricking us into doing the violence, tricking us into being evil ourselves? I don't know if demons exist, but I would accept by definition they are evil. By that I mean to say, their goals are to corrupt and debase us, or to get us to do those things ourselves. I have experienced a number of frightening things from the paranormal, also profound things. Is everything we're afraid of evil? I doubt it. Is anything we're afraid of evil? Are ghosts evil? If spiritual beings other than demons exist, are they all evil? Is Sasquatch evil? I doubt it. We need to understand them. Certainly, like us, they have their moods. There are clearly times they do not want us to be in particular areas. They can be intimidating and frightening, but that alone does not make them evil. If you subscribe to the biblical creation story, then you accept that we began living naked in the wilderness without worry or care. We broke the rules, and we were cast from that existence. In our version of the story, no one else was mentioned. From that point, we pretty much know our own basic history, and we told it to ourselves. We know that we can be violent beyond rational description, jealous and spiteful. Sure, we can be good too, but that's a little bit more rare in our history to practice those lighter qualities. Now consider that we are becoming aware of beings that are very much like us, living naked in the wilderness. That sounds more like how we began, how we were intended to be. Now consider carefully who seems to be living more closely to that paradise originally created for us. I wonder who brings violence to the table, and who resorts to it only when provoked beyond reason. All of the evil I have observed in my life comes from humans, who choose to believe unsupportable ideas that they accept to be truth without evidence. They justify unimaginable acts of violence through willful ignorance to avoid responsibility for unreasoned savagery. It is rational and reasonable, even logical, that we should observe with caution, but not with fear. We should honor and respect the potential dangers, but we need to learn by observation what objective truths may be discovered. What science brings to the table here is a disciplined approach that allows us to question new ideas and distill them into objective truths, facts that do not depend on belief or will. I am the curious cryptid, and, with Sasquatch, there are many truths, but facts are rare.